Well, I have a hard time thinking that it really has that much to do with Carter Williams just because of the fact that we've seen this at both ends of the court. I mean, you mentioned the rebounding numbers, his steal and block numbers are off the charts since the trade deadline. And to me, that points to this primarily being a case of, him being not only 100% physically, but just mentally beyond the rust and, some of the trust issues with his knee after the ACL injury, and I think that's primarily what's fueling this. But yeah, I think offensively he has been a little better than even an optimist who, like me, who thought he was the number one prospect in the 2013 draft, expected at this point of his career, where he's able to sustain an above average usage rate and still score at a high rate.
Yeah, the one thing about Noel that has been really interesting to me anyway, as you mentioned, is the fact that his shooting percentage, too, is going up as well. And you wonder if that has to – you mentioned the health. And to me, I wonder if this is just a case of a guy who's finally confident in himself. And is the ceiling higher from him now than you thought maybe it was going to be? Have you seen signs that he can be more than a liability on the offensive end?
I think the big thing is that he's able to create a little bit of his own offense, especially you put him in the post and he's got that little lefty hook, which he's been making more frequently. But what I really like is when he faces up a slower defender and is able to use his quickness to go by him. And then the other thing we see with him is, the Sixers have him handle the ball a whole lot from the high post, which is something that I think bodes well if he eventually ends up playing power forward in the NBA.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, looking at Nerlens Noel, and then, of course, Joel Embiid. I don't know how much you've heard about what he's been doing, but we get a lot of little video here and there of him, and everything seems to be really exciting. Now that Noel looks like a somewhat capable offensive player, we know he's a very good defensive player, and Embiid, pairing them together, would you be an advocate of adding a Karl Towns or a Jahlil Okafor, watching Noel and what you think of already Embiid?
To me, Karl Anthony Towns is, at this point, fairly clearly the number one prospect available in this year's draft. So if the Sixers end up number one and there's not some sort of a scenario where someone is really willing to overpay to get up from 3 or 4 to the first pick, then I think you have to take Towns and figure it out later in terms of, probably trading one of those guys, because there's just not enough minutes to go around to justify having all three of them by the time they're in their primes. If they end up at the second spot, I think that's where it starts to be a more serious conversation about, given the questions about Jahlil Okafor's defensive ability as a rim protector, as a pick-and-roll defender, those questions, are you better off going with a guy like a D'Angelo Russell or an Emmanuel Mudiay, who's a better fit for the rest of the Sixers' talent? At that point, I think there is a case maybe to go for need, just because I don't think the difference in terms of talent is great.
Yeah, I was going to ask you right now, Kevin, as the draft is getting here, has this tournament or has anything changed from Okafor? You sounded like you go with Towns over Okafor right now.
I think both guys have had moments in the tournament where they've really enhanced their stock. I mean, Okafor just dominant offensively in the first 2 wins for Duke, showing what he can do, and I think he's had some better moments at the defensive end as a shot blocker and a rim protector. But you look at what Towns did Saturday night against Notre Dame, and that puts the lie to the notion that he's a weak offensive player. He's not the dominant post scorer that Okafor is, but he can certainly score, and he's just such a presence at the other end as well that to me he's the safer number one pick.
Kevin, the team moving forward here, the Sixers team, I don't know how they've won as many games with this group. Does that say something about Brett Brown, or does it say that some of these guys are better than we gave them credit for?
I think a little of both. Brett Brown has done a great job of first keeping these guys competitive and playing hard throughout this long season. They haven't gotten down on themselves, when it's gone wrong offensively and they've gotten blown out. And, to be an above average defense with a group this young is a pretty rare thing, and I think a testament to Brett Brown, but also, the talent that has been accumulated, starting with Noel, but, also a lot of talented long players on the wings. Jakar Sampson's been a nice fit defensively. I think the other bigs have done a good job. They're really buying into the system.
Yeah, and you wonder, this will be the third draft for Sam Hinkie. At what point, if you're in charge of the Sixers or you're his boss, are you starting to say, Sam, we got to start to see improvement? How many years can they win 19 and 20 games? Is this draft a very important one for Sam?
I think inevitably you'll see improvement, especially if Joel Embiid is healthy, and then you add, at least one top pick, potentially a second one, if the Lakers pick ends up falling outside of the top 5. All of that, and I think you might see them be a little more active in free agency to bolster the core than they have been the last couple of years. And then just the guys you've found along this process. Robert Covington looks certainly like a keeper. Jeremy Grant, I think, has generally shown that he's a keeper. Isaiah Cannon and Ish Smith have done a nice job at point guard, where you haven't seen a drop off without Michael Carter-Williams since the trade deadline. You put all of that in the equation, I think I'd be surprised if this isn't at least, a team winning in the high 20s next year.
Interesting. I want to go back to Noel real fast and get your take on this, Kevin. ESPN.com NBA analyst for ESPN Insider, Kevin Pelton. Does Noel remind you of a guy? Is there a guy you can compare him to?
I don't know if there is. I mean, I think we've tried to put him in kind of the Tyson Chandler mold in terms of, a general outlook of what he would do. But in terms of just his quickness for his size, I think it's relatively unique in NBA history. I mean, the fact that he can capably go out and defend power forwards and then also be, the rim protector that he is. I mean, I guess Ben Wallace would be the one guy that would come to mind in that regard. But even in his case, I don't think his steal rate was as good as Noel's is.
Defensively, Ben Wallace was a guy who led a team to a championship based on the fact that he was such a difference maker on defense. Are you seeing Noel changing the game as a defensive player at this stage, and do you think he can be even better?
I am. I mean, first off, guys always get better with experience because that's such a big part of the defensive end, which is, again, why it's rare to see a team as young as these Sixers defending as well as they are. But, yeah, I think the one thing that stands out watching him recently is he's starting to have a bit more of a deterrent effect in the paint where guys just aren't even driving on him, whereas they would have early in the season and kind of, maybe been surprised if he was there to contest their shots. So, that's the improvement I've seen over the course of the season. I think will continue to happen. And, I don't think it's inconceivable that he could be a guy who competes for Defensive Player of the Year honors like Ben Wallace did in the past.
Yeah, and then, this is a team that could potentially have 2, 3, or maybe 4 first-round picks. And the way that they're getting there, that game last night, Sixers-Lakers, does the NBA, in your opinion, need to do something here, Kevin, about the way these games are playing? I know last night it looked like the Sixers almost wanted the Lakers to win, and the Lakers are trying. It's just a bad way to go, isn't it?
I mean, I think it's a perception issue more than it is a reality issue at this point. You have situations like the Lakers sitting out guys like Jeremy Lin and Ed Davis and Carlos Boozer at the end of the season, and it's questionable how much that really is about getting their young guys opportunities as much as it is about not winning games. And as long as that perception is out there, I think maybe you have an obligation to look at correcting that. But I think most of the real fears that people had about, especially these Lakers-Sixers games, because they were unique where both teams had such incentive to lose because of the draft pick situation, the trade, the Sixers having the Lakers draft pick if it falls outside of the top 5. But I saw 2 teams that were playing to win last night among the guys who were on the court and the coaches, and maybe not always capable of doing that in late game situations.
I know they weren't taken in the same draft, but if you could pick Noel or Wiggins right now, which guy are you going with?
I would still go with Wiggins because I think that, what he's shown me this season in terms of his athleticism, his ability to create off the dribble, which was the biggest question I had about him last year. I think right now Noel is the better player, and he would be ahead of Wiggins on my Rookie of the Year ballot. But looking ahead, projecting ahead, I think Wiggins has, the potential to be a dominant two-way player in a way that Noel probably cannot.
All right, Kevin Pelton. For more, K. Pelton over there on Twitter for more on the NBA, as he tweeted the other night, people who continue to call the Sixers unwatchable clearly haven't been paying attention to Nerlens Noel, and the Sixer fans in this area, the few that are paying attention, are seeing Noel flourish. Kevin, always a pleasure, man.
All right, thanks for having me.